The shadow of Thorn Manor. The scent of expensive sandalwood and fresh floor wax always heralded the arrival of Frank Thorn, but today, the air in the Thorn Manor felt heavy, like the static before a relentless thunderstorm. It was a house built on a foundation of silence and secrets, a sprawling estate of 30 rooms where the echoes of footsteps seemed to die before they ever reached the vaulted ceilings. Audrey knelt on the cold marble of the grand foyer, her fingers gripping a damp microfiber cloth until her knuckles turned white. Her reflection in the polished black stone looked ghost-like, pale skin, dark hair pulled back into a severe bun, and eyes that held the weary shadows of a woman who had spent 3 long years scrubbing away the messes of people who didn't even know her name. To the world, Audrey was a nonentity. She was the girl who emptied the bins, the girl who polished the silver, the girl who vanished into the service corridors whenever a guest arrived. At 24, Audrey's world was measured in square footage and the acidic, lingering sting of lemon-scented bleach. She was a shadow in a house of light, a silent witness to the cold brilliance of the man who owned it. She knew the exact temperature he liked his coffee, the exact way he preferred his newspapers folded, and the exact moment his heavy Italian leather shoes would strike the pavement outside. The heavy oak doors swung open, admitting a gust of biting winter air and the rhythmic, authoritative click of footsteps. Frank Thorn stepped inside. He was a man carved from granite and high interest rates, his face a mask of calculated indifference. He didn't look down, he never did. To him, Audrey was simply part of the architecture, as essential and invisible as the crown molding. "The gala guest list is on the desk, sir," his assistant, Melvin, murmured, trailing behind him like a nervous shadow. Frank didn't break his stride. He stripped off his leather gloves, tossing them onto the console table without looking. "Cancel it. I want the house silent tonight, Melvin. No calls, no business, no distractions. My head feels like it's in a vice, and I cannot tolerate the noise of people tonight." Audrey's hand paused on the marble. Silent. Frank Thorn thrived on the noise of industry. He was a man who slept 4 hours a night and spent the other 20 building a global logistics empire. Silence in this house usually meant a storm was brewing in the dark corners of his mind. As Frank moved toward the grand staircase, a small, velvet-covered box slipped from his overcoat pocket. It hit the thick Persian rug with a dull thud. Neither Frank nor Melvin noticed. The doors to the study slammed shut moments later, the sound echoing through the foyer like a final judgment. Audrey stood up, her knees popping from the cold. She knew the rules of the house. Rule number 1, return lost items to the butler immediately. Rule number 2, do not touch. Rule number 3, above all, do not pry. But as she reached for the box, her thumb accidentally caught the latch. The lid popped open. It wasn't a diamond ring. It wasn't a set of gold cufflinks. It was a tarnished, brass locket, dented, old, and utterly out of place in a billionaire's pocket. Inside the locket was a faded, grainy photograph of a woman who looked hauntingly like Audrey, the same high cheekbones, the same eyes that seemed to hold a world of unspoken sorrow. Tucked behind the photo was a scrap of paper with a single, handwritten word, "Forgive." Audrey felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter wind. Why would a man who owned half the city's skyline carry something so broken? And why did this woman's face feel like a mirror to her own soul? Reflection question: have you ever discovered a secret about someone that completely changed how you saw them? Tell us about that moment in the comments, we'd love to hear your story. The weight of the crown. Audrey tucked the locket into her apron pocket, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She couldn't give it to the butler. If she did, Frank would know she'd seen it. If she kept it, she was a thief. She was trapped between a dangerous curiosity and the desperate need for survival. Audrey wasn't a maid by choice, she was a maid by necessity. 3 years ago, she had been a promising art student with a scholarship and a vibrant future. But life has a way of tearing up your plans. A tragic car accident had taken her parents and left her younger sister, Tammy, with spinal injuries that required constant, expensive medical care. Audrey had traded her canvases for cleaning cloths, her brushes for mops, and her dreams for a steady paycheck. Tammy was her heartbeat. Every floor Audrey scrubbed paid for the specialized treatments that kept Tammy's hope alive. Her deepest fear wasn't the grueling work or the crushing loneliness, it was the day she might fail to provide the care that kept her sister from losing her ability to walk forever. Meanwhile, Frank Thorne was a man living in a gilded cage of his own making. Known as the Iron King of Logistics, he had built an empire from the ashes of a fractured childhood. He lived in a house of 30 rooms but occupied only 3, his office, his bedroom, and the gym. He ate alone. He slept little. He treated people like variables in an equation, cold and replaceable. Later that evening, the house was eerily still. Audrey was tasked with bringing tea to the library, the inner sanctum where Frank spent his nights staring at spreadsheets. As she pushed the heavy door open, she saw him standing by the floor-to-ceiling window. He had removed his tie, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with tension. "You're late," he said, his back still turned to her. "My apologies, Mr. Thorne." The kettle took a moment, Audrey replied softly, her voice steady despite the locket weighing down her pocket. He finally turned, his piercing blue eyes narrowing as they landed on her. For the first time in 3 years, he didn't look through her. He looked at her. He noticed the way she held the tray, with a grace that suggested she hadn't always been carrying silver service. He noticed a faint smudge of charcoal on her thumb, a remnant of the sketches she did in secret during her 10-minute breaks. "What is that on your hand?" he asked, stepping closer. The air in the library suddenly felt very thin. "Nothing, sir. Just some dirt from the kitchen," Audrey lied, her heart racing. "It's charcoal," Frank corrected, his voice dropping an octave. "You're an artist. I've seen the sketches you leave in the trash when you think no one is looking. Why are you here, Audrey? A woman with your talent shouldn't be scrubbing my floors." Audrey's breath hitched. "Talent doesn't pay for surgery, Mr. Thorne. Reality does." Before she could move away, the locket in her pocket shifted, clinking against the metal button of her apron. Frank's eyes dropped instantly. His entire demeanor changed. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by a sharp, predatory focus. "What do you have in your pocket, Audrey?" "The inciting incident." The silence was suffocating. Slowly, her hand trembling, Audrey reached into her apron and pulled out the brass locket. "I found it in the foyer, sir. It fell from your coat. I was going to return it." Frank snatched it from her hand. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the cheap metal. For a second, the mask of the billionaire cracked. His jaw tightened, and a flash of raw, unadulterated pain crossed his features. "Did you open it?" he asked, his voice like a low, dangerous growl. Audrey swallowed hard, refusing to look away. "I did. I'm sorry, Mr. Thorne. I shouldn't have." Frank let out a sharp, bitter laugh. He paced toward the fireplace, the locket clutched in his palm as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded. 3 years you've worked here. You've been the perfect ghost. And now, you stumble upon the one thing I spent 20 years trying to bury. He turned back to her, his eyes burning with a strange, dark intensity. "Do you know who she is? The woman in the photo?" "No, sir." "She was my mother," Frank said, the words sounding like they were being dragged over broken glass. "She was a maid. Just like you. She worked herself into an early grave in a house just like this one, serving people who thought her life was worth less than the silver she polished. The man she worked for, he was my father. He let her die because he wouldn't pay for her medicine. He left me with nothing but this locket and a debt of hatred that fuels everything I do." Audrey felt a lump form in her throat. The distance between them, the billions of dollars, the social standing, suddenly felt like a thin veil. They were both children of struggle, both protecting someone they loved against a world that didn't care. "And now," Frank continued, stepping closer until he was just inches away. "You look exactly like she did the last time I saw her. Every time I see you in that uniform, it's a haunting I didn't ask for. It makes me feel things I can't afford to feel. It makes me remember the boy who couldn't save her." The tension in the room shifted. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was a magnetic, tragic pull. Frank reached out, his fingers hovering just inches from Audrey's cheek, before he caught himself and pulled back, his face hardening into a mask of stone. "Leave," he commanded. "And if you tell a soul about what you saw in this room, you'll be out on the street by morning. Do you understand?" Audrey fled. She ran through the corridors, her heart hammering. She had seen the monster's wounds, and she realized with terrifying clarity that she wasn't just his employee anymore, she was the living reminder of the love he had lost and the vengeance he had built his life upon. The growing storm. The days following the confrontation were thick with an unspoken electricity. Frank didn't fire Audrey, but he didn't ignore her anymore either. His gaze followed her across the room, not with the coldness of a master, but with the searing intensity of a man who was seeing someone for the first time. Audrey tried to maintain her distance, but the secret they shared acted like a bridge. She began to leave small kindnesses for him, a specific type of tea when he looked particularly tired, or moving his favorite book to the side table where he could reach it. She saw him now, not as the Iron King, but as a man suffocating under the weight of his own armor. One afternoon, Frank found Audrey in the conservatory. She was sitting on a low stool, sketching on the back of a discarded grocery list. She was so absorbed in her work she didn't hear him enter. "You're drawing her again," Frank said softly, his voice echoing in the glass room. Audrey jumped, nearly dropping her charcoal. "Mr. Thorne. I was just taking a break. The floors in the East Wing are finished." He took the paper from her hand. It was a portrait of Tammy, captured with such love and precision that the girl seemed to breathe on the page. "My sister," Audrey whispered. "She needs a surgery she'll never get. That's why I'm here. That's why I'll scrub every floor in this city if I have to. She is the only beauty I have left." Frank looked at the drawing, then at Audrey. For the first time, he saw the woman behind the uniform, the sacrifice, the fierce protectiveness. "How much is the surgery, Audrey?" "It doesn't matter, sir. It's more than I'll earn in a lifetime of cleaning." "I could pay for it," Frank said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. His voice was thick with an emotion he couldn't name. Audrey stiffened, her pride flaring like a torch. "I'm not asking for a handout. I work for what I earn. I won't be another charity case for you to feel better about your past." "It's not a handout." Frank snapped, his frustration boiling over. "It's a waste. You're wasting your life in this house while your sister suffers. Why are you so stubborn?" "Because if I take your money, I'm just another person who owes you," Audrey shot back, her eyes flashing with a fire he hadn't expected. "And I won't be another line in your ledger, Frank. I won't let you own me." It was the first time she had used his name. The air between them crackled. Frank stepped closer, his hand finding hers. His touch was warm, sending a jolt through her system that made her forget the cold marble floors. For a fleeting second, the CEO and the maid vanished. They were just two people, tired of being alone in the dark. But the moment was shattered when Melvin burst in, his face pale. "Mr. Thorne, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the board of directors, they've found out about the mother's estate. Joseph is at the front gate with the press. They're claiming you've been using company funds to hide your shameful past and buying off witnesses." Frank's hand dropped as if he'd been burned. The Iron King mask slammed back into place. "Get her out of here," Frank told Melvin, his voice turning to ice. "And don't let the press see her. If she's caught in this, they'll destroy her to get to me." Reflection question: when life gets hard, do you find yourself opening up to others or shutting them out to protect yourself? Let us know in the comments. The midpoint revelation. The atmosphere in the manor shifted from tension to a full-blown Arctic chill. Frank became a whirlwind of cold fury, locked in his study for 18 hours a day. The board of directors, led by Joseph, a man who had always coveted Frank's chair, were using the revelation of Frank's low-born heritage to claim he lacked the temperament to lead. Audrey felt the walls closing in. She was the only one who knew the full story. Suspicion was a poison, and it was beginning to seep into the hallways. On Thursday night, Audrey was summoned to the study. When she entered, she found Frank standing by his desk, but he wasn't alone. Joseph was there, a predatory smile stretched across his face. "Ah, the little maid of the hour," Joseph purred. "Mr. Thorne was just telling me how much he trusts his staff." Frank looked haggard. His eyes were bloodshot, and he wouldn't look Audrey in the face. "Audrey," he said, his voice flat and dead. "Joseph claims someone sold a photograph of a certain brass locket to the press, along with a detailed account of my mother's history. He also claims he has proof of where that information came from." Audrey's heart plummeted. "I didn't. Mr. Thorne, I would never." "He knows you wouldn't do it for free," Joseph interrupted, sliding a manila envelope onto the desk. "But the bank records don't lie. $20,000 was deposited into an account registered to your sister, Tammy, just yesterday. The exact price of her upcoming surgery. Curiously, the transfer came from a private, untraceable offshore account." The room spun. Audrey looked at the documents. It was all there, the account number, Tammy's name, the exact amount. It looked like a smoking gun. "Frank, please," Audrey gasped, turning to him. "I don't know where that money came from. I haven't spoken to any reporters." Frank finally looked at her, and the look in his eyes broke her heart. It wasn't just anger, it was the look of a man who had finally dared to hope and had been burned for it. "The money is there, Audrey. And my mother's face is on the front page of every tabloid. You were the only one who saw that locket. I was framed," she cried, her voice cracking. "Think about it. Joseph wants you gone. He's using my sister's life to destroy yours." "I have the proof," Joseph sneered. "And Frank has a choice. Resign quietly to save the company's image, or be dragged through a public scandal involving a thief and a housemaid." Frank walked over to the desk and picked up the locket. He looked at it for a long time, his expression unreadable. "Get out," he said to Audrey. "Frank. Get out," he roared, slamming his fist onto the mahogany. "Take your blood money and your sketches and never set foot in this house again. You're just like the rest of them. You saw a weakness and you sold it for a price." Audrey didn't wait. She ran. She ran through the grand foyer, past the silent suits of armor and the polished marble she had spent years cleaning, out into the pouring rain. She had lost her job, her reputation, and the only man who had ever truly seen her, and the worst part was, she had no way to prove that the miracle money for her sister's life was actually a curse. The darkest hour. The rain didn't just fall, it punished. Audrey stood outside the gates of the Thorne estate, her meager belongings stuffed into a plastic bag. She arrived at the small, cramped apartment she shared with Tammy. The lights were flickering, and the air smelled of damp wool. "Audrey? Why are you home so early?" Tammy asked from the couch, her legs wrapped in the heavy braces. Audrey couldn't even look at her sister. How could she explain that the money for the surgery was the very thing that had destroyed her soul? I lost the job, Tammy. There was a misunderstanding. But the hospital called. Tammy said, her voice trembling with hope. They said an anonymous donor cleared the balance. Audrey, I can have the surgery on Monday. We're saved. Audrey collapsed onto the floor, a jagged sob breaking from her chest. They weren't saved, they were trapped. Joseph hadn't just framed her, he had used her sister's life as the bait. If she used that money, she was confirming her guilt. If she didn't, Tammy might never walk again. It was a choice between her integrity and her sister's future. Meanwhile, back at the manor, the Iron King was crumbling. Frank sat in his darkened study, a bottle of expensive scotch half empty on the desk. Every corner of the room reminded him of her. He felt a double betrayal, the betrayal of his mother's memory, and the betrayal of his heart by Audrey. A knock at the door startled him. It was Melvin. The assistant looked terrified, his hands shaking as he held a digital recorder. "Sir, I found this in the guest wing garbage. I think Joseph dropped it during the board meeting." Frank listened. The recording was faint, but the voices were unmistakable. It was Joseph, speaking to a contact at the hospital. "The transfer is complete. Make sure the girl's sister gets the notification tonight. We need the paper trail to look like a bribe. Once Thorne sees that bank statement, he'll kick her out, and without her as his moral compass, he'll be too distracted to fight the takeover. By the time he realizes she was innocent, I'll be sitting in his chair." The glass in Frank's hand shattered. He didn't care about the blood on his palm. He had been a fool. He had spent his whole life expecting people to hurt him, and when he finally found someone real, he had let his own trauma blind him. He had driven away the only person who saw him as a man instead of a bank account. And now, she was out there in the cold, carrying a burden he had helped place on her shoulders. The turning point. The roar of the engine was the only sound in the rain-slicked streets as Frank pushed his car to its limit. His hand was bandaged in a makeshift wrap, but he didn't feel the sting. The only thing he felt was the crushing weight of his own arrogance. He arrived at Audrey's building, a crumbling tenement that made his heart ache. He burst through the door without knocking. "Get out," Audrey said, her voice a razor-thin line of pain. She was packing a small suitcase. "I know," Frank said, stepping into the room. He looked nothing like a billionaire. He looked like a man who had lost his way. "I saw the recording, Audrey. I know what Joseph did. I know about the bank transfer." Audrey let out a harsh laugh. "Oh, you know now. You didn't believe me. You didn't believe the woman who has been in your house every day. You believed a snake in a suit." "I was a coward," Frank whispered, finally looking up. His eyes were swimming with tears. "My whole life, people only wanted something from me. I forgot how to recognize someone who just wanted to be with me. I was so afraid of the pain that I chose to hurt you before you could hurt me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the brass locket. He held it out to her. "This belongs to you now. Not because of my mother, but because of you. You're the only person I've ever met who is stronger than I am." "The surgery is on Monday," Frank said. "I've already moved it to the best private hospital in the country. And it's not Joseph's money. It's mine. A gift, Audrey. No strings. No debt. Just, because I can't breathe in that house if you're not there." Audrey took a step toward him. The anger was still there, but beneath it was the undeniable truth: they were two broken pieces that finally fit together. "We have to stop him, Frank. Joseph thinks he's won. We can't let him destroy everything." Reflection question: forgiveness is hard, but it can be the key to moving forward. Is there someone in your life you need to forgive? The climactic resolution. The boardroom of Thorne Logistics was a cathedral of glass and steel. Joseph sat at the head of the table, flanked by the board members. He had already prepared his victory speech. "Since Frank Thorne has failed to appear," Joseph announced, "we shall proceed with the vote to remove him as CEO. All those in favor?" The double doors were thrown wide. Frank walked in. He wasn't wearing his usual armor-like suit. He wore a simple black turtleneck and a look of absolute, terrifying clarity. But it was the person beside him that caused a collective gasp. Audrey stood at his side. She wasn't in her maid's uniform. She wore a tailored charcoal dress, her hair flowing free, and her head held high. "I brought the truth, Joseph," Frank said. He played the recording of Joseph's confession. The board members looked on in horror as Joseph's own voice detailed his plan to ruin Audrey to steal the company. "I've spent the last 12 hours buying back every share you dumped on the market this morning," Frank added. "I now own 51% of this company, Joseph. You're fired. And the police are waiting downstairs." As security led a shattered Joseph out of the room, Frank turned to Audrey. He took her hand and kissed it in front of the most powerful men in the city. "I care about everything that starts and ends with you." Satisfying conclusion. 6 months later, the Thorne Manor no longer felt like a mausoleum. The heavy curtains had been replaced with sheer linen that let the morning sun dance across the floors. Audrey stood in her new art studio, the once drafty conservatory. She wasn't a shadow anymore. She was the heart of the home. Tammy walked into the room, moving steadily without her braces. The gallery called. "They want your portraits for the autumn exhibition, Audrey." Frank walked in, pulling Audrey into a tender embrace. He handed her the restored locket. On the back, it now read, "Not a ghost, but a light." Audrey looked at the man she loved and realized that the greatest shock of all wasn't the scandal or the money. It was the fact that in a house built on silence, she had found a voice, a family, and a love that was finally, beautifully, her own. Reflection question: Audrey and Frank's story shows that beauty can grow from the most difficult circumstances. What is one silver lining you found in a tough situation? If you enjoyed this journey of redemption and love, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more emotional stories. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.